Welcome to the Idaho Main Street Podcast, where we talk about the issues that matter to you. Welcome to the Main Street Podcast. We're here with an absolute legend in Idaho. If you've been around, then you know Wayne Hammon. Currently spent 12 years, is that what we said?
12 years at the Idaho Associated General Contractors, or as most people know, it's the AGC.
Yeah, we're going to say AGC because I've already messed up the Title I. I said association. It's not. It's associated.
We're the Idaho network of commercial contractors. So the people who build your roads and bridges, the schools that you go to, our members build multifamily housing. We build water and wastewater treatment facilities. We build temples. We build churches. We build hospitals. We do not build single-family homes.
Okay.
But everything else that's being built in Idaho is pretty much being built by one of my members.
And it's important because these members all contribute to be part of the group that you oversee as CEO. And so your job is to be able to ensure that their priorities are communicated to policymakers and stakeholders, right?
That's right. I'm very fortunate. We have 735 members in Idaho. In fact, the Idaho AGC, for being a small state like Idaho, we're the fourth largest chapter of the AGC in the nation.
Really?
87 chapters. And our 735 members build Idaho's tomorrow. We're building the roads, the bridges, the infrastructure that every Idahoan is going to use today, tomorrow, and in the future. And so I'm really fortunate to be able to work with them. They're wonderful people.
Yeah, and I love that line. That sounds like land at Disneyland, right? We're building Idaho's tomorrow.
Idaho's
tomorrow.
It's
Tomorrowland. That's
there
fantastic. As fun as it is and sounds, I mean, you've got a tall task.
Idaho is a wonderful place. I grew up here. I'm the sixth generation Idaho. My family moved to Idaho before Idaho was a state.
Wow.
And we're very proud to call Idaho home. We feel it as an obligation to make it my kids are seventh generation. Their kids are going to be eighth generation. We want to make Idaho the best it can be so that my family can stay. And if my family can stay, then your family can stay. And the people who moved here last week, their family can stay. But that means we have to keep moving forward. We can't look in the rearview mirror, and we can't just sit on our laurels, or the rest of the economy is going to catch up with us. And so Idaho is very fortunate that we have great resources, we have great people, and we want to see that move into the future.
Yeah, I'm excited today for us to get into some of these necessary proponents of growth and moving forward, and some of the ways you think we might be looking in the rearview mirror too much. But let's start at the beginning. Okay. Grew up on a farm in Bingham County?
I did. So if you know where the Rose exit is, just this side of Blackfoot, you can see that overpass from my kitchen window. My brother owns the farm now. He's got it rented out to a sugar beet farmer who grows potatoes and sugar beets on it. But the family's still there. All of my siblings still live in either Bonneville or Bingham County. I've got nieces and nephews all up and down the state. My wife's from Caldwell, and so we compromised, and we live 2 blocks from her parents and 4 hours from my parents. So, because that's the compromise. So we live over in Meridian now, but I grew up right here in eastern Idaho.
Man, I didn't think I would be getting marriage lessons today. That's our compromise. And that's probably a compromise some of our policymakers need to make at times too. But
that's right.
We digress. What did growing up on a farm in Bingham County teach you as you now are so involved with some of the most hardworking members in Idaho?
It is amazing. I have great respect for agriculture. In fact, after I went to college, I then made a career in agriculture for quite a while before I went to state government. And I have great respect for the hard work they do. My first job was moving pipe. And, it teaches you when you're out there at 6 o'clock in the morning in the dark moving pipe, I'm like, I'm going to go to college. This is not going to work for me. I'm going to have to go do something. And so I did. I went to school and got a degree so that I could move forward. But I think that we're blessed, not just in geography, but in people. The farmers that I grew up with, the people that are still farming in eastern Idaho, are just the best of the earth. I just really love them.
Yeah, I moved pipe too as a kid, and quickly, that whole taking the ACT thing didn't seem interesting until moving pipe.
Only good thing about moving pipe is riding the four-wheeler out to the field.
Yeah, that is the fun part. I got paid by pipe, and it was like 15 cents a pipe, and so you'd move a whole line and realize that's not even going to pay for your Mountain Dew at the end of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So let's talk about your time in state government. You worked for one of my political heroes. By name alone, we love Butch Otter, a guy that could work a room like nobody else, who is fun and charismatic, and who made some really politically courageous moves as a leader. What was it like spending time in government with him?
Butch is one of my best friends. I love the guy. In fact, I just talked to him the other day. He's doing really well. He had surgery last month, but he's doing very well and is coming back really strong. Our best to him. He's now 82.
Whoa.
82 years old. But I first met Butch when he was a congressman, and I was in D.C., and he was a congressman, and we met. So when he came home and was elected governor, he asked me to come work for him, and I ran the budget office during the first 6 years of the Otter administration. And at the time, I was the longest-serving DFM administrator in the state history. Now, Director Revere and Director Alex, whatever his last name is. Adams.
You got it, yeah.
Both of them have since beat my record. But at the time, I was there for a really long time, and it was during the recession.
Oh.
And so Butch and I were good friends. We became even better friends because we spent hours and hours sitting at his kitchen table, looking at the state budget, trying to figure out how do we make 1 + 1 not equal 2? How do we make it be 2.1, 2.5? Where can we find a penny? And we worked really, really hard during those really lean years to stretch that budget as far as we could. And what I came out of that was Butch's philosophy of essential functions of government. There are certain things that the government must do. There are certain things that only the government can do. There are other things we do because it's nice. And we have an extra buck, it's nice to do that. But when we didn't have that extra dollar, we eliminated a lot of the nice things and focused on the essential things. Mm-hmm. And I'm really proud that in those 6 years, we cut a lot of budgets. In fact, we cut 19% of the general fund from the first year I was there to the last year I was there. We managed our reserve very well. We were the only state this side of Colorado that didn't raise taxes. I believe we did a really good job managing that. But what I'm really proud of is that through that, we found 2 areas where we invested money. We actually increased spending. One was the National Guard in their Youth Challenge, where we take troubled teens and help them turn their life around. And the other was infrastructure investment, because those are things that move Idaho forward. Those are investments that help go forward instead of just cutting. We did have to cut a lot of things, and it was hard. But I was really proud of the fact that we were able to position Idaho that the second the lights turned on, as soon as the recovery happened, Idaho was first in line. And we got so far out there. Oregon, if you look at our neighbor to the west, Oregon is still catching up. Their economy is still not quite as strong as it was before the recession. And that's been 12 years, 15 years. And they're still struggling because they went about it wrong. I feel like Idaho went about it right.
Do you feel like that time working in the governor's office in the recession was necessary preparation for you being in leadership both during a COVID pandemic and now unprecedented growth to our state?
Yeah, I learned an awful lot during that time, and it was great. I spent so much time in the federal government. I spent other time, but during that recession, it was all hands on deck every day. Mm-hmm. It was hard work, and putting in those hours and the nice thing about that is now when I come to my job at the AGC or I look at people call and they ask for advice, there's not a penny in state government where I can't tell you where it's from. I know those budgets I bet you there are 20 members of JFAC. Short of the co-chairs, I probably know those budgets as well as anybody because we studied them to the penny. We found everything that somebody was hiding, and we did it. And so, yeah, I feel like it was great preparation for the rest of my life.
It seems obvious to you and many policymakers why, especially during the recession, investing in infrastructure is a wise move and an investment, and now it's a necessary investment as a fiscally conservative state. But to some, it's not as obvious. So if we take it back to elementary, why is spending in these type of spaces actually the right decision?
Right, and that's actually a really good comparison. So I hear a lot of folks, and again, I grew up here. I love Idaho. I'm a conservative as anyone. I'll put my credentials up there. I mean, I worked for George W. Bush. I worked for Butch Otter. I worked for Orrin Hatch. I got the credentials to say it. I think some people look at any penny spent as spending. Yeah. And I think you have to step back from that and say, well, what are we spending it on? And then I go back to Butch's philosophy about necessary versus nice. There are things that the government does which are nice. It's nice to do certain things, and if we have the money to do it, that's great. But there are certain things that are necessary, and infrastructure is one of those things. We have to invest in that. So the federal, we're here in Idaho Falls right now. Take a look at the Idaho National Lab. My dad worked at the INL for 30 years, wow. Right? I got his retirement clock hanging on the wall of my office at the AGC. we breathe and live INL. The federal government and private companies are investing billions and billions of dollars into INL. There's going to be so much work and so much research going on out at the site. It's going to be almost back to its glory days when the Navy was doing all that work there. I'm so excited about that. But that means more people are moving to eastern Idaho. People are going to move to Idaho Falls. They're going to move to Rigby. They're going to move to Blackfoot. They're going to move to Groveland. And they're coming whether or not we build a new road or not, because the federal government and these private companies are investing that money. And that's a great thing. The fact that they're doubling down on Idaho, they want to be here, is a wonderful thing. But if we don't match that with infrastructure, then your commute's going to get longer. Your commute's going to go. I mean, you drive from Idaho Falls to Pocatello or Pocatello to Idaho Falls today during rush hour, and you take your life in your hands. I mean, that I-15 is a scary road. And if the BYU Idaho kids are on it, it's really scary, right? And so we've got to do something to stay in front of that. And to me, that's the difference between spending and investing. Spending is, we go to the store and my kids want a candy bar. I can afford 50 cents for a candy bar, but only after I've bought bread and milk and eggs. Yeah. And to me, infrastructure investment is the bread, milk, and eggs. It is something we have to do up front, or we're going to pay the price 10 years from now, 5 years from now, 20 years from now.
For the record, 50 cents was pre-inflation prices.
I don't know what a candy bar costs.
Come on, Wayne.
My kids don't get candy bars.
Buy your staffer a candy bar every now and then. Okay. Some people look and they say, I got to get off my exit, and it backs up like crazy. We need to get that fixed. Or a bridge. This bridge is in need of repair. Why is it not so simple as just the county commissioners say, okay, let's fix it?
It is so tough. And one of the things we're really proud about is, so we talk about the freeway and we talk about those state highways. In the last 3 years, the state of Idaho has invested more money in local bridges than they ever have in the past. I just met with the director of the local highway transportation advisory council the other day, and they're in last year, this year, and next year. So in the 3-year span, they're building more than 200 bridges across rural Idaho. That is so important, because if you're on a school bus and you can't cross the river because of that weight restriction, you got to drive around, that means that kid's got to get up 45 minutes earlier. That means he doesn't get home until 45 minutes later. If you're a potato farmer, you can take an empty truck across the bridge, but you can't bring a loaded one back. You just now cost that guy the profit he's going to make on bringing those spuds to market. So we've got to fix those. The problem is it's just not so simple, because in a county government or a city government, those are competing with other things. Yes, we need a bridge, but we also need a fire department. Yeah. We also need an ambulance service. We also need a courthouse. And so they all have to compete. And when you get out into rural Idaho, some of the bridges we're talking about may only have 200, 300 trips a day. Now, that may sound like a lot, but the bridge out of my subdivision has got 5,000 trips a day. Yeah. Right? And that's just one little thing in Boise. And so for the state to put money forward to fix these little bridges out, and it's wonderful. It's from every corner of the state, we're seeing people reaping the benefits of this investment, and it's going to save people time, it's going to save people money, and it's going to open up a whole new part of Idaho for people to live in.
Well, it's a godsend for the city councils and county commissioners who are on shoestring budgets, who will either have to raise taxes or cut something that you talk about as being necessary in order to fix those bridges.
The nice thing about this local investment that we're making, these 220, 250 bridges, whatever it is it does require a local match. It's not just free money. Mm-hmm. They have to come up with a local match for it. And so, but instead of paying for 100% of that bridge, they only have to pay for 20%. And the state's going to put in the other 80%. And it is wonderful. It is a great program. We're so excited to see that happening all across Idaho, especially here in eastern Idaho. We have so many canals and streams, and the water system over here is so complicated that you can't go anywhere without crossing a bridge.
Yeah, that's a good point. We think construction, and we think of your group, and it's primarily orange cones, and they're fixing a road.
I love orange cones. I'm thinking that it should be like a state symbol of some kind, right?
We could put it on the flag.
We got the Appaloosa, we got cutthroat trout, we got orange cones. We have 2 seasons in Idaho. We have winter and construction season.
Utah follows our match there too. I-15 just tends to be orange cones all the way down. But that's not it when it comes to infrastructure. Sometimes we think roads and bridges, which are so important. You've articulated well what you're doing to improve that space. Before we went live here, we talked a little bit about the power grid, which is not something a lot of people initially think of when infrastructure comes to mind.
That's right. You look at what happened in Texas, right? And their power grid failed, and people were left. People died because the power grid went out. And we are fortunate in Idaho that forward-thinking people have invested in the power grid. And a lot of this is private money. Idaho Power, Rocky Mountain Power, other groups, but at the direction of the PUC. The state of Idaho, through the Public Utilities Commission, has directed investment in the Idaho power grid that we're not going to have a Texas failure here. More importantly, we have built capacity in the Idaho system so that we can add both generation and consumption. So, for example, the State Board of Land Commissioners last week approved a new solar farm on state lands, the first one that's going to be built on public property in Idaho. That's not a problem for Idaho because our power grid actually has excess capacity. We can put that power onto the grid and we can pull it off in Rexburg or Twin Falls, wherever it needs to go. We can also add things like this big, giant new computer chip facility in Micron. It's going to take a lot of energy to run that computer chip factory. But we can do that in Idaho because we've invested over time in the power grid. You think about that, and you think about the jobs that creates. I don't know how many jobs the Micron, I know in construction terms it's created thousands of jobs, but when it's up and running, it's going to create even more jobs. Then you go just across the border into Montana. In Montana, they have not made those investments. They have not invested in them. And I had a guy in my office the other day from Billings who told me that they can't build anything bigger than a Walmart in Montana because they're concerned about the power it was going to take. Wow. So they're not going to build a data center in Montana. They're not going to build a Micron in Montana. They're not going to build a research facility in Montana because they don't have the power to get there. And even if they did have the power, they don't have the network, the grid to deliver it. So Idaho is really blessed the fact that we have pushed forward this investment so that we are set to do that because everybody who lives here knows the secret's out. People are moving here, and we've got to be able to keep up.
And that's really articulates well the difference between spending and investment that you kind of laid out earlier. Is as we look to the future and make the necessary investments now, we're able to attract some pretty big employers into the state.
That is right. We've seen some all over, both here in eastern Idaho and in western Idaho, and to that point in North Idaho too. We have seen some big companies want to work here, and why wouldn't they? I mean, all of us live here for a reason. We love it here.
Mm-hmm. Not to mention, it's almost been like nuclear month with what's going on with some of the AI facilities and how these big companies have announced that they are going to use nuclear as a power source. From your members' perspective, knowing that a lot of construction goes on out at the INL and the jobs that will come as a result of that. Why is nuclear something people should be excited about instead of run from?
Oh, I have always been. Again, I show my bias. My dad worked at the site for 30 years and 32 years, and so I show my bias. But I believe nuclear is the perfect fit for our region and our economy because the Idaho power grid is built upon the dams. It's built upon renewable sources. And so now we have another renewable source. I think that the wonderful thing about the nuclear energy is that it doesn't take inputs from, you can import coal from Wyoming or something, but we can generate that right here. And the research they're doing at the INL is fascinating. These little mobile units that they're able to move around. You look at what's going on right now in Cuba, right? They can't get any power. We could drop one of those INL units down there. They'd have power tomorrow. Yeah. The research they're doing is fantastic, and it's safer now than it's ever been. I consider a renewable source because it doesn't consume those fossil fuels. And I think that's what the AI folks are saying. It takes so much power to generate AI stuff, to do the imagery and the stuff they're doing with AI. It is such a big power suck that we've got to expand our production.
We'll shift gears a little bit here as we look at the diversity that you have in your membership. Mm-hmm. The man and the women that wear the hard hats and put the shovel in the ground, to some of the people doing really complicated things, and the people working long, crazy hours. What are some of the biggest concerns as you talk to your members? Are we looking at the cost of living? Are we talking about workforce shortages? What do you see that you hear from them?
Yeah, so the number one issue facing the construction industry, and it's been this way for at least 5-6 years, is talent. Attracting and retaining talent, both at the management level, the project manager level, and the turning the shovel level. Mm. Just finding people who are capable of showing up to work on time and doing their job and doing it right is difficult. if you're going to work on a house, you have to be able to do fractions. And we don't necessarily teach that. And so we've got to be able to do that. We have a vast shortage of welders. We have a vast shortage of operators, just people who can drive something without running into something is a challenge. And so doing that and being able to have that, talent is the number one challenge. I'd say the second challenge right now is investments and the interest rates.
Okay.
The Fed lowered the rate. We all thought the interest rate would go down, and it hasn't. And so investors are a little nervous right now. There's a lot of cash parked out there that I think will come into construction eventually, but right now they're just sitting on their hands. And so between not having enough people to do the work and not the money to do tomorrow's work, we're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, you listed 3 things I can't do: fractions, weld, or drive without hitting anything. So I will be of no use to you in this space. When we talk about workforce shortages and talent, is launch that was ushered and championed by the governor something that will assist your members?
It will. We're working with the governor's office and with the Workforce Development Council and with the schools to propagate on launch. A lot of that's going to go into the medical field and engineering, which are important and vastly needed here. We're trying to make sure that construction is included in those things. So right up the road here at Bonneville, they have a fantastic welding program at the Alternative School of Bonneville, and the teacher there puts out 50, 60 kids a year with a welding certificate.
Wow.
And he told me when I toured it, he said, 40 of these 50 kids are going to go on to college, and they may not ever use this certificate, but they now have a skill that will last their lifetime. The other 10 are going to make even more money by using the certificate. And so we want to see that propagated. We want to see that throughout the universe. BYU Idaho has a wonderful construction management program. There's a nationally ranked construction management program at Boise State. We have engineering programs at both those schools plus the University of Idaho. And so to get those things high on the launch list is important to us.
Yeah, and so you see the needs of your members, and you find yourself in the right circles to advocate for those needs. It's no secret that you are heavily involved in advocacy for your members. You're not shy about the fact that you want to be in the room and communicating their needs. When necessary, your members write campaign donations or you'll send mailers out. As you go through your list of who are the right people to support, what is the checklist for you and your members of who are the policymakers that we want to help see elected?
That's a very good question, actually. For the Idaho AGC, it comes down to a question about, and it's hard to quantify, but what we look for is a candidate or a politician or a policymaker who's going to be able to put Idaho ahead of themselves. And sometimes that's difficult for a politician to do. A true statesman, somebody who is a leader, somebody who deserves to be able to stand up and cast that vote, has got to be able to look beyond their own personal interests. They have to be able to look beyond their own next election and really ask themselves, what is the right thing for my constituents? What is the right thing for my state? And I don't think Butch created this saying, but he used to always say, vote your conscience, vote your constituency, and vote your Constitution.
Oh, wow.
So if every elected official takes an oath to defend the Constitution, you should never break that oath. Every legislature represents 35 to 45,000 Idahoans who don't get to be in that room. They need to represent constituency, and at the end of the day, you should vote your conscience. It is really hard to see a politician who knows the right thing to do but won't do it because they're scared of an independent expenditure or they're scared of some outside money coming in after them. What we look for in the politicians that we support is the backbone to stand up and say, this is what's right for Idaho, and we're going to do it no matter what the costs are.
Well
and sometimes
said.
that means we lose.
Yeah.
So, more often than not, we win, but sometimes that means we lose. But I'd rather be on the losing side and be right than sell out and win the election.
Can you think of any current elected officials that fit that mold? You'd probably consider Butch one, right?
I consider Butch that. Yeah. I think Brad Little, our governor, does a wonderful job of taking the big picture, looking at the entire state, doing that type of stuff. it's hard. I've known Mike Simpson since I was a kid, and I love the guy, and he's in that vein. So is Mike Crapo and Jim Risch. My favorite thing about Jim Risch is that he doesn't care what anybody thinks of him.
So true.
Right? He knows who he is.
Yeah.
And he's going to vote the way he wants to vote. And so we're very fortunate to have those type of people in our state. We have that on the local level too. I think that Stephanie Mickelson from here in Bonneville, Bonneville County, does a great job. She's unapologetic about the fact that she's a farmer and she's a water user and she knows those policies really well and she's going to do what's right for her community. And so I think there are lots of people that are doing that. There have been times I've been disappointed in politicians in Idaho, but I think for the most part, we get it right more than we get it wrong.
Yeah, I was asked about Stephanie Mickelson when she was first elected by some legislator. Said, what do we make of this new Mickelson character? And I said, if you get into a boxing ring, you better hope she's behind you and not across from you.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of hers. I'm a big fan of the Wadsworths and the Mickelsons. I mean, both of the sides of that family, I'm a big fan of. But it's the courage to stand up for what's right is what we look for.
Well, I won't ask for your list of people that don't fit the mold. After this goes off, I'll have you list all the people that you
that we don't support
that might not have that same political courage. So being in a lot of those necessary rooms and writing the checks and supporting the people, it's important, as you mentioned before, that we're looking for, not in the rearview mirror. Are there things Idaho is doing right now that concerns you that not any legislative decision, or maybe it's just general motives, but where are we looking in the rearview mirror, Wayne?
One of the things that's attracted people to Idaho, and I fully admit this is one of the big attractions, is our tax structure. We have a very hands-off approach to tax. We have a very balanced tax structure. I'm afraid that there are some people in the political world that want to push that so far that they want to starve the beast of government so much that they're going to go beyond eliminating funding for what's nice and into what's necessary. We have a very favorable tax rate in Idaho. It's lower than, I believe, I don't know this for a fact, but I'm going to guess, it's as low or lower than any of our neighboring states. But yet there are people that want to push those taxes even lower. Get me wrong, I hate paying taxes. I understand that. But there comes a point where, back to our first conversation, there are things that have to be done. There are things that only the government can do. No private company is going to build that bridge in Madison County. Only the government's going to do that. We can't do that without tax money. So taxes are a necessary evil we have to do if we're going to keep moving forward. And I think there are people that look at that and be like, well, we have to continue to cut. If we continue to cut, we'll continue to starve the beast. The smaller government, the better. I'm all for that. Until you come to a point where you're not trimming fat, you're trimming marrow. And when you're cutting through the bone and you're doing more damage than you are helpful, then we've gone too far.
And that's coming from a guy that cut nearly 20% of the general fund.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. In our tenure, we cut 19% of the general fund, and it was necessary, and we did it. And it can be done, but there comes a point where you can go too far.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it sounds good on a commercial, and it looks good on a mailer. Well, historic tax cuts, and we love it. But you're right, something we probably need to keep our eyes on.
So my point is, I would not want to advocate for a tax increase.
Hopefully not.
Hopefully not, right? I think that's right. But if you just keep the tax structure the way it is now, the growth will rise that, rising tide lifts all boats. The growth itself will pay for that. And for me, as a native Idahoan, I love the fact that people are moving here and now going to pay more so that they help raise the tide. I mean, my family helped build this state that you're now enjoying. Your family should help build it for my kids now. And so I'm not talking about raising taxes. I'm talking about keeping our structure in place so that we can get all the necessary things done. And then if there's extra, great, let's cut it.
Yeah, my dad, whenever we go camping, my dad would always say, we got to leave the campground better than we found it. We have to pick up our trash. There's something to be said about our roads and bridges and our schools, and we need to leave this community better than we found it.
No, I agree. And camping's a perfect example, right? We're investing right now billions of dollars in Idaho campgrounds because they were overrun during COVID, and every bathroom got trashed. And so we're building and building and building in the parks right now, both state money and federal money, and that's wonderful because that's what makes Idaho so great. I love being able to go rent a yurt or find a camp spot where I can pitch a tent and be able to do that without having to, a 9-month waiting list. And that's where we were during COVID.
Yeah. You still sleeping in tents, Wayne?
Yeah.
I'm really finding that hard to believe that you're out pitching a tent.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, you got to try that.
The kids sleep in a tent.
The little ones are. Yeah. So you're everywhere. You know, you're here in Idaho Falls today. You're in Pocatello tomorrow. You're off to D.C. You've traveled every bit of this state, I'd imagine. You've been prepped with this question, and we hope you have a good answer. As you've traveled throughout all of Idaho and you've seen the good work by the construction industry, is there a local hole-in-the-wall restaurant that our listeners, if they stumbled by, you would say you better go in there and get a meal?
Better go in there. So I think the best meal in Idaho is Meatloaf Day at the Stagecoach Inn in Garden City. The Stagecoach Inn has been there forever. And any day you go in there is great. But Meatloaf Day, I want to say it's Wednesday or Thursday, is fantastic. Here in Eastern Idaho, I try really hard to get to Cast Iron on 17th in Hammon. Yeah. I love the place. It looks like something out of a Hobbit movie or something like that, but I love the place. Now, unfortunately, they're closed on Monday, so we're not doing that, but it's really good. You know, up north, I don't want to tell you, though, because
it's going to get overrun. We have billions of listeners.
I'm not going to give you my North Idaho one because
right.
I don't want anyone going there. It's the best pasta in the state of Idaho, and I don't want anyone to know.
Will you tell me off the record?
Off the record,
okay.
I'll tell you.
All
But if you're in Eastern Idaho, go to the Cast Iron on 17th and Hammon. If you're in Western Idaho, the Stagecoach Inn on Meatloaf Day is the best food you'll find.
Better yet, if you're in Western Idaho, come over to Eastern Idaho and see what it's like. And if you're in Eastern Idaho, drive over. We've got great roads and bridges.
That's right.
Yeah. What's the likelihood of getting that second crossing?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I like to say that it's, Evel Knievel couldn't make it across the river once, and we expect ITD to do it twice. So it's hard, but there is a plan. The problem is the plan's not funded. There is a plan. The engineering work has been started. We have a location mostly selected. The county commissioners are on board. The city council's coming along. The problem is to build that bridge would mean we would build nothing else in Idaho for years. And so this legislative session, in 2025, the Idaho legislature is going to be asked to vote on a bill called TECM 3. It's the technical, it is something. It's one of those government acronyms.
Yeah.
But it funds that bridge.
Okay.
And it's important that we do that because the economic progress that we're having in Twin Falls, Jerome counties, and that whole Magic Valley area has depended upon us getting those trucks off the Prime Bridge and onto another bridge. Blue Lakes Boulevard is my least favorite road in the state, and I live on Eagle Road, the busiest road in the state. I would much rather drive Eagle Road every day than ever spend a second on Blue Lakes Boulevard. We have got to get the Twin Falls problem fixed. The current system does not do that. There is nothing in the current ITD budget that will build you a second bridge. We have to pass additional funding if we're going to be able to do that.
If the additional funding comes through, that will still allow business as usual to go through with all other projects?
That's exactly right.
Okay.
And so in any given year, 60, 70% of the ITD budget is based around maintenance, right? So we're going to chip seal this road, we're going to replace this bridge, we're going to do this. Then there's a little bit of money left over for expansion. But these big projects, the second crossing there, the third lane between Pocatello and Idaho Falls, the third lane between Coeur d'Alene and State Line going to Spokane, those projects only happen if there's additional money because there's no way the current system can ever afford them. We would have to shut down the entire rest of the state to do one of those projects.
So that'll be an important one as the legislative session starts, something we can call our legislators about and see the status of that. As we wrap up here, Wayne, we're going to draw on your fountain of wisdom. You don't survive in the industry you're in, and you don't survive in the political circles that you're in if you are unable to compromise, if you're not a kind person, if you burn relationships and metaphorically bridges. What's some advice you can give to our listeners of how you've been so successful in being an effective advocate in the political space when it's so toxic?
So I have two examples. They both come from my time in Washington, D.C. My very first job out of college was working for Orrin Hatch, the senator from Utah, legend from Utah. Yeah. He taught me that having friends on the other side of Idaho is not a problem. You can still disagree with somebody and still be friendly. Orrin was best friends with Ted Kennedy, spoke at his funeral, voted against him every single day, but loved the guy and stood up at his wedding, right? It's one of those things. You can have friends and it's not a bad thing to have friends. You don't have to agree with them, but you can still be friendly. The other thing I learned came from my second job, which was for U.S. Senator Larry Craig from Idaho. Larry taught me to compromise. He taught me that it's better to get 90% of what you want and live to fight over the last 10% than to hold out for the 99th percentile. If you're playing football, and I love football, why not take the 90-yard run and then fight over the last 10 yards as opposed to hold out for the Hail Mary? Yeah. And Larry has his faults. Or what I learned from him in the time I worked there, that incremental change is how you win long-term battles. And you got to compromise. Let's take 90%. If we can get 90%, we're almost there. Then we'll finish it tomorrow. So, too often I think compromise is seen as a bad thing. Compromising away may be a good thing, but if you can get the majority of what you want, why not take it and come back tomorrow to get the rest?
Yeah, a great lesson, whether you're in politics or you're in an office or your relationship or education, all places that those two principles can fall into place.
Yeah, and I worked for both of those senators for a significant amount of time, and both of them taught me those lessons that have guided me ever since. It was my very first and very second job out of college, and here we are. I forget how many hundreds of years later, I'm still drawing upon those lessons.
I love that. As an avid football fan, how do we feel about Boise State's chances this season?
I feel good about Boise State, but I am thrilled.
Don't say BYU. Don't
the
say
BYU
it. Don't
Cougars
say it.
are
Come
undefeated.
on, Wayne.
They're number one in the Big 12. The game Friday, I screamed and yelled at the TV so loud that they heard me all the way in Provo and scored that touchdown. But the Cougars are on fire, and I'm so excited. But Boise State's great. Idaho's having an okay year, but I'm so excited about the Cougars.
Yeah. Are you more excited that the Cougars are doing well or that the Utes are doing poorly?
Go Cougars.
Wayne, we know how busy you are. We know you're on the road running around. We appreciate the time you spent with us today.
Thanks for spending it. We're glad to do it.
As more of these issues come forward, can we have you back?
Yeah, we're happy to do it. I'm in Eastern Idaho quite a bit, but when you're in Western Idaho, come see me.
Absolutely.
These issues have a statewide impact, and people across all of Idaho. You get up in the morning and you turn on you turn on the faucet, and you don't even think about the infrastructure that went into delivering that. You flip on the light switch, and infrastructure brought that to it. Your kids get on a school bus, and infrastructure gets them there safely. These are issues that every single Idahoan ought to care about, and I'm happy to talk whenever and wherever anybody wants to bring it up.
I love it. A legend by every sense of the word, a great advocate.
A legend just means you're old.
You said it, not me. All right. Wayne Hammon, appreciate your time.
Thanks, man.
Until next time.